Let's pick up where we left off. We have the function called add2, and we called it and we tested it. But now we want to write this averaging function. So let's write that. I'm going to write it below the add2 function. This is extremely important. I'm going to be using that function to compute the average, because the average is the sum divided by the number. I need add2 to exist before I can call my function. There are ways around that. We'll show that in a different video. But for now, please keep in mind that if you're going to call one function from another, that function must already exist. The return type of a function is the actual type of data we want out. Now, an average of two integers in general will not be an integer. Instead, it will be a double. So I'll be returning a double, and I'm going to call it avg2, average of 2, int a and int b. Did you notice that I used a and b again? I also used them here. I could have not done that. I could have called them something different. These two a's and b's belong only to this function here. Remember, we have those scope blocks. Anything declared inside of a scope block only belongs to that block of scope. Since this function here doesn't live inside of this scope, these are in fact two completely different variables whose names are a and b. I know it is confusing, and I chose to do that on purpose, so that you could see I can reuse variable names in functions, and that's okay. So, what do I need to do to average 2? Well, I need to add them up, and then divide by the total number. So I'm going to say that int sum of 2, just so that I'm not using the same variable names for everything. It will make it difficult to read the code. And I'm now going to call my add2 function. Remember, what happens here is that the value of this function's a is copied into the value of this function's a. And now I want to return the average. I'm going to do that all in one line without an intermediate variable. Return sum of 2 divided by 2.0. I need the 0.0 because otherwise I'll be doing integer division. So what's happening here? This return statement first evaluates whatever this number is, determines the value, and gives it back to wherever I called it. So let's take a look. I'm going to actually just modify this code. Rather than adding 2, I just want to average 2. What I should see is the average of my two numbers. I'm going to add, first of all, 5 and 4, and we should see that the average is 4.5. Let's take a look. Five and 4, and it said my average was 4. Let's explore why. What happened there? Well, if you take a look, I'm returning a double from here, but s is an integer. The computer will always keep s as the same type. So in fact, we had to change that to a double. What's key to understand is that the function cannot change the type of a return. Let's give that a run. And now we correctly see 4.5. If I run it one more time, and let's give it something else we know, let's say 10 and 10, we should see an average of, hopefully, 10. And in fact, we do. So what are some of the key points we made here? The first one is that if we're returning something, we should always be careful about the return variable we're storing it in. I initially had that as an integer, and it chopped it off like it should. The function will never change the type of a variable in some other function. Second, naming in functions is completely separate. Add2 has two variables called a and b, and average of 2 has two distinct variables called a and b. And that's because of these scope blocks here. These variables exist only within add2's scope. Therefore, I can reuse function and variable names. But you should be careful. In general, you want to make your names descriptive so that they're not accidentally mistaken one for the other. In this case, I think we really should have used different names so that we're not confusing ourselves. In the next video, we'll take a look at something called function prototypes, which allow us to write functions in any order.